Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in this, the Clown Decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And we are currently in the part of the timeline where things are getting directly worse. As on Thursday evening, it was a bit of a disaster for the Tory party, as there were two by-elections taking place in mid-Bedfordshire and Tamworth, both of which are Tory safe seats, and mid-Bedfordshire has pretty much always been a Tory seat since even before World War II. So these were relatively large seats for the Tories, and as you can probably tell from the title, they didn't do very well. Labour takes Nadine Dorris's former seat in mid-Bedfordshire by-election. Alistair Strathern overturned huge Tory majority to win seat vacated by former Culture Secretary. Since Nadine Dorries was pretty much Boris Johnson's largest cheerleader in Parliament, she decided to resign her seat after Boris Johnson resigned his, after the fairly shaky Sue Gray report and further Parliamentary Privilege Committee's investigation into him, which from everything I can tell was nothing short of a hit job. I mean, Sue Gray decided to join the Labour Party as Chief of Staff barely months after she completed and published her report on Boris Johnson, so that tells you everything you need to know about that. Labour have won the mid-Bedfordshire by-election, overturning a huge majority and delivering a significant blow to Rishi Sunak's hopes of holding on to power at the next general election expected to be in 2024. Alistair Strathern takes the parliamentary seat vacated by the former Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries, beating the candidate hoping to hold it for the Conservatives, Festus Akinbusoye. Strathern overturned a majority of 24,664, believed to be the greatest such result at a by-election since at least 1945. Yes, there is no doubt about this. This is embarrassing for the Tories. This is DEFCON 2 levels of disaster. This is an imminent wipeout, and from my analysis, they just completely deserve it. This is the Joker meme. What do you get when you have a party that doesn't listen to their members or their voters and does everything for the left-wingers, where there's about 6 other choices for left-wing voters? You get what you freaking deserve, is the answer. And my god, it's got to be DEFCON 1 for the Tories come the 2024 election, so I say let's just ride it out and enjoy the entertainment of the collapse of the Tory party while we still can. It boosts the leader of the opposition, Keir Starmer, who will see this victory and that in another Tory safe seat in Tamworth on the same night, as further evidence his party is poised to return to government after similar by-election victories in recent months. And here we have a lovely graph from The Guardian showing the historical share of the votes in mid-Bedfordshire, going all the way back to the late 1980s. And as you can see here, it's always pretty much at the very least by the way, a 10% lead for the Conservatives. Always, without fail. And then somehow you get to 2023 by-election. Look at that drop-off. That is a cliff face. And Labour's support is about equal to that of 1997 when Tony Blair came in, which was indeed a bit of a wipeout for the Tory party back in 1997. But realistically, if the Conservatives gave any reason for Conservatives in the UK to vote for them, you probably wouldn't have seen a switch around here. You got to bear in mind, this is a Tory safe seat, and this is considered a blowout when a safe seat gets completely flipped. Again, you've got to bear in mind, this has been a safe seat since 1931, and it is under Rishi Sunak's premiership where it has finally flipped. And this is just a graph of the vote share, by the way. It gets a lot more interesting when we look at the graph for voter turnout. Because as you can see from this graph, voter turnout between 1987 and 2019 has been fairly high. It's been at least 65%, with 2001 being the lowest, before you get to 2023 with the voter turnout being 45%. This shows an incredible amount of apathy from voters, and this is probably one of the main reasons that the Tories ended up losing the seat. And this is how a lot of people are feeling. It's probably how most of you in the audience are feeling when it comes to voting for the Tories. You just don't feel like you want to. Because why would you when all they are doing is doing what Labour has done, but slower? I've been saying it for quite a while now, but it is really true. All the Tories are an Ed Miliband government. That is all they are. Even back in Theresa May's day, there were plenty of pieces of political cartoons where all she was doing was stealing Ed Miliband's idea, such as having a price cap on energy, slamming more money into the NHS without actually doing anything to actually improve it, claiming they want to have controls on immigration and then just let 1 million immigrants in a year. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. When you've been in power for 13 years and your main strategy is to say, we're actually going to fix these problems now, we promise, it just doesn't fly with a lot of the voters. We need some radical changes, and we need some evidence that you are willing to make said radical changes. So bearing all that in mind, we'll now take a look at Tamworth. Labour overturns huge Tory majority to win Tamworth by-election. Keir Starmer's party takes back seats it lost to Tories in 2010, in win that will bolster its hopes of a big victory in the general election. Labour has overturned a near 20,000 vote Conservative majority in Tamworth, winning back a seat it lost to the Tories in 2010, and bear in mind it was created in 1997, since being abolished in 1945. Labour's Sarah Edwards received 11,719 votes ahead of Andrew Cooper, the Tory candidate, who received 10,403, a majority of 1,316 for Labour. It was a 23.89% swing to Keir Starmer's party, and voter turnout was as low as 35.87%, little more than half of the 2019 figure. Thursday night proved to be a signal occasion for Labour, which also swept away a huge Tory majority to win Bedfordshire, the former seat of Nadine Dorries. And once again, we can see the historical vote share for Tamworth, and while it clearly was never as safe as Bedfordshire, that majority is quite a large one to lose, but it's one that was always a risk after the Boris Johnson victory, because quite clearly, saying get Brexit done and we will implement absolutely everything that UKIP said they would, or at least most of it when it comes to immigration, was clearly a vote winner. And they've had a few years to do that. They have done the opposite. We have seen nothing but more and more illegal immigrants crossing the channel, and more legal immigrants, as visas are now easier to get. And so if you have immigration up there as one of your main worries, and of course the economy is one of your main worries, why would you have the party that has caused all those problems back in? Though having said that, it is also quite funny to see that UKIP, Reform, and even Britain First, though it just goes in other in this case, did better than the Lib Dems and Greens in Tamworth. These were obviously protest votes, trying to send a signal to the Conservative Party to say, please go more right-wing, because those votes will have made up the difference and probably got them a majority with Labour, or against Labour, I should say. And this is genuinely a problem I think we are going to see with the Tory party. They are going to probably think, or CCHQ at least, are going to think, oh, we need to be more like Labour then, since they are winning these elections, when in reality, it's complete voter apathy and protest voting that is losing them these elections. And you have to hope that their analysts realise that, because unfortunately, if they see Labour winning elections, all it seems to do is move the Tories to the left. And you are unironically probably going to start seeing that. And if they do start doing that, please vote Reform. I would say don't spoil the ballot. I would say have any sort of protest vote you can. You need to send a better signal to the Tories. This is why we ended up with a Brexit referendum, because UKIP was the party for less immigration and to leave the European Union, and because they kept cannibalising the Conservative vote, the Conservatives moved right on that issue. And so if you vote for a party that is right to the Conservative Party as a protest vote, of course they're more likely to move right, rather than see that you're not going to vote for them and they think, oh, well, we may as well try and cannibalise the Labour votes. Because the Conservative Party HQ is apparently full of big brains. So anyway, as a result of these two fairly large wins, Labour declares historic by-election wins as political earthquake, and party says it is redrawing the map after overturning large Tory majorities in Tamworth and Bedfordshire. In other words, Labour are getting pretty cocky, but to be absolutely fair to them, they have every reason to be cocky. They are effectively up against a zombie government. This election is theirs to win. It is entirely on them if they lose it. And to be quite honest, I can see Labour shooting themselves in the foot with their policies. I mean, over on the Wellington Project, we looked at their preliminary ideas for their manifesto, and a lot of them were effectively just Blairism, but a bit more socialist. And when the manifestos come out, I have no doubt we will be going through said manifestos and criticising absolutely everything in it, because there is absolutely nothing from Labour I can imagine that would be good. However, I don't think the Tories' manifesto will be that much better. I think it will be, once again, full of empty promises. However, with Labour's manifesto, I think they will try and fulfil all their promises, because they will have the power to do so and actually move along with it, and they will have the civil service on their side. Keir Starmer has said that Labour is redrawing the political map as he carried out a triumphant tour of the site of two historic overnight by-election wins, as his party overturned a huge Conservative majority in Tamworth and mid-Bedfordshire, standing next to Alistair Strathern, who overturned the Conservatives' near 25,000 majority under Nadine Dorries in mid-Bedfordshire. Starmer said the new MP had made history here over the past 24 hours with the scale of the win. And that's probably true, to be fair. Well, yeah, of course it's true. They nearly held it for 100 years, the Tories, and it's been overturned because Sunak is terrible as a Prime Minister, and the Tories have no backbone to actually do anything conservative. The Labour leader then travelled to Tamworth to appear alongside the party's winning candidate there, Sarah Edwards, who overcame the Tories' 2019 majority of just under 20,000 to triumph. Speaking at a country park near Bedford, Starmer said Labour was redrawing the political map by taking seats such as mid-Bedfordshire, which had consistently returned Conservative MPs in every election since 1931. Which, yeah, is actually quite an insane result when you think about it, but this is where we're in the clown decade. You act as Labour for 13 years and people think, well, I may as well just have Labour in. I don't care anymore. What you're doing is not enough to get my vote anymore. Not being Labour and being Labour, but about 10 or even 5 years ago in some cases, is not good enough anymore. We want to shift to the right and we are not getting it with the Tories, and there is really no other serious party that has earned my vote. I mean, Reform probably have the best case to get people's Conservative votes, but there's just no energy behind them from the looks of it. I think we just need a disaster of a Labour government for 4 years before the Tories really get it in their heads that they do need to be quite radically conservative. We know that voters have here voted for us and that they've put their trust and their confidence in a changed Labour Party, and we will repay them for that trust and confidence, he told assembled activists. I mean, really, when we end up looking at the voter share of the turnout, that's in percentages of those that turned up for the vote. Having a very quick look at the mid-Bedfordshire elections, Labour actually got less votes than the Labour Party got in the general election in 2019. However, to be fair, you are always going to see less for turnout at by-elections. But really, I think this is just generally showing a voter apathy because most people don't feel represented by people in Parliament. And in Tamworth, it's a fairly similar situation where they only got about 800 extra votes compared to the 2019 election, with turnout being 20,000 lower than the previous one. So this is clearly just voter apathy more than people wanting a Labour government, but of course Starmer is going to claim that people want a Labour government because it's good propaganda. And pretty effective since, yes, they did just overturn two pretty big majorities, which just goes to show how useless the Tory party have been for the past 4 years, and even beyond that, to be honest. Carrying on with Starmer's speech, we do so humbly, and I know there are people yesterday who probably voted Tories in the past who voted for a changed Labour Party because they despair at the state of their own party. Again, that's quite a hard thing to try and claim when the Labour Party actually got less total votes in one election and only got 800 more, which quite easily could have come from the Green or Lib Dems. I'm glad to see that our party has changed and that they can put their trust and confidence in them, and I hope that persuade other voters across the country who may have voted for other parties in the past that the party of the future, the party of national renewal, to reject the decline of the last 13 years, is this changed Labour Party. And to be honest, that's not a terrible speech, to be quite honest. You can easily use this by-election result to make all of those claims. They are obviously heavily biased towards Labour having a blowout election because everyone thinks that that is going to happen. But it's not because people necessarily want a Labour Party, it's because nobody wants to carry on the Conservative Party in its current state. Pretty much the only people voting Conservative at this point are people who know that Labour is going to radically change the landscape of Britain, have another Blairite revolution, if you will. I know the Tories at the very least will slow that down until we can figure out what the hell is going on and have a proper Conservative Party in. But really, that's what the last 13 years have been about, and all we've ended up with is way beyond what Blair probably could have ever dreamed of. And further down there is a bit of cope from the Tory chair, Greg Hands. As he says, I don't think a single person came to the door to say that despite all the problems people are facing, that Labour and Sir Keir Starmer were the solution to their problems. I don't see any enthusiasm for Labour, but clearly there's been a lot of, if you like, background circumstances in those two by-elections that have also made the job difficult for us because Chris Pincher was aptly named because he appeared to be pinching boys' bottoms in Parliament, which is obviously against sexual harassment rules. And Nadine Dorries was a massive Boris Johnson fan, and after resigning, obviously your constituency is going to be very aware that a man who has been kicked out of Parliament, and although I think it was unfairly, most people see it as fair and really don't like Boris Johnson due to the whole COVID scandal. But carrying on, it says Conservative sources suggested the results would not prompt a change of strategy from Downing Street, which, to be honest, the only strategy change they really need to make is that they actually keep to their promises. And given that there's still people coming over from France on boats, and given that immigration is still increasing, yeah, that's where the strategy needs to change. They need to keep to their promises, but I don't think they're going to do that within a year. Han said, we need to continue to deliver against our priorities and make sure that people see that Rishi Sunak is doing a very good job as Prime Minister. Unfortunately, absolutely nobody is seeing it that way. So I really would get on panic stations, and I really would just put in as many radical policies as you can, and do what Gordon Brown did. Put in a load of policies that is going to be politically difficult for Labour to go back on. Because you may as well at this point just play dirty with dirty. You've got absolutely no other choice here. You will be destroyed at the next election. And if you want further evidence that this is all due to apathy, here is The Guardian's investigative journalism taking place in Tamworth and mid-Bedfordshire, simply asking people around these areas what they think of the parties. People are just so fed up. Tamworth and mid-Bedfordshire voters on a mood for change. On the streets of Labour's new constituencies, there was anti-Tory feeling, but also much apathy. And to be honest, a lot of that anti-Tory feeling is probably overlapping with that sense of apathy, because that's pretty much where I am now, and I can barely see it improving. I think they can win it, said Lee Blanche, the shop worker from Clifton in Bedfordshire. The habitual Labour supporter maintained his allegiance on Thursday, while he acknowledged there was a difference between winning a by-election, where turnouts are usually lower and voters sometimes choose to punish the ruling party. He said the Conservatives' local record in government meant the opposition were now well placed. People are just so fed up. It has been a tough 2 or 3 years, and all we are seeing is scandal and corruption. It just seems like money is going to money, and the working man is just getting stepped on. We expected the Conservatives to turn it around, and they have not. It just feels like everything is a mess ever since Brexit. It seems like one mess after another. Well, that's a pretty typical Labour response. Nothing out of the ordinary there. It's the typical Harry and Paul sketch of Question Time, of just the Tories, the Tories, the Tories, the bankers, the bonuses, the bankers, the bonuses. It's just applied to Monday issues such as the Brexiteers, corruption, which, you know, it's not like there's no reason to blame corruption and Brexit on some issues, but they are obviously overly focused on, especially by leftists and Labour. In Bedfordshire, there was also a Get the Tories Out vote. As the count was underway on Thursday night, the Lib Dems, whose candidate came third, said they have paved a way for a Labour victory by collecting protest votes in traditionally true blue villages. Naomi Williams, who lives in the village of Southill, was among those sympathetic to that view. While she was unable to vote in the event, she said she supported the Lib Dems. Her priority was to see the Tories unseated, but she was reticent about voting Labour due to lingering doubts about the party's record on anti-Semitism. Which, to be fair, I think with this whole Gaza-Israel conflict, you are seeing much of the remnants of that issue playing about. But these are all the voices of people who are never going to vote Tory anyway. There is always going to be anti-Tory sentiment because absolutely everyone is still scared of the ghost of Thatcher. And despite the Tories being blatantly Labour for 13 years, it's still not shaken that they're the nasty party mentality that a lot of left-wingers have. So it's pointless even trying to appease them, but they will never learn. But I'm more interested in a Conservative voice, which thankfully The Guardian have asked a Conservative what he thinks, or at least one who voted for them in 2019. Among the people they would need to convince is Patrick O'Gara, a retired civil engineer who voted Conservative in Tamworth in 2019. Labour will be a better government than the Conservatives right now. They're not working properly. They promise this, they promise that. They're all the same, he said. O'Gara said he had previously voted for Labour under Tony Blair, which, to be honest, quite a lot of people will have voted Tony Blair in '97 after being Conservative voters, since the Tories were, again, quite stale after being in power for well over 15 years. And the Labour Party, at least within their manifesto and from their propaganda, seem to have moved to the right, away from the open socialist tendencies back in the 70s and 80s, to Blairism, which we are still seeing the results of today. Obviously, I think a lot of people would now regret voting Tony Blair, but that's just the way it goes. Obviously, every politician lies and every political party lies to try and get your vote. If you're not convinced about that after 13 years of the Tories breaking every promise that they had, I don't think there's any hope for you. He wanted to vote in Thursday's by-election but was unable to because he did not have the photo ID that, under new electoral rules, voters must have to cast their ballots. It makes me feel sad. I wanted to vote but they didn't let me, he said. He said the town had changed for the worst, shops closing, police station closing, the council. All they want to do is knock everything down, he said, and that is genuinely what's happening to quite a lot of towns, villages and cities around the UK. There are more shops covered in shutters than there are open shops on your average Saturday when travelling through many towns and villages in the UK, because we live in a corporatist society at this point. Only the big corporations are allowed to succeed, everyone else has to be punished. Which, if that's not Blairism, I don't know what is. And also, I have to say that I kind of appreciate this Patrick O'Gara for admitting that really it's his own fault he didn't prepare for this by-election by preparing his own photo ID, because the amount of left-wingers who would try and blame this on the Tories, being like, oh, see, they're trying to stop Labour voters by forcing them to have voter IDs to vote, is absolutely absurd. But clearly this Patrick O'Gara realises that it's his own fault, so good on him. And even though Patrick is clearly a swing voter and therefore the most important cohort when it comes to winning elections, it is quite clear that the Tories are losing their votes mainly on the front that they are not keeping to their promises and they are just absolutely neck deep in scandal. And this is probably why, as The Guardian reports, senior Tories say party seems to be giving up after by-election defeats, and Rishi Sunak appears safe, but divisions widening on strategy, as MP bemoans lack of support in Tamworth, which I have to say is entirely their fault. I have no sympathy for the Tories in this defeat. Senior Conservatives have dismissed the idea of any attempt to unseat Rishi Sunak, even after 2 disastrous by-election defeats, but warned that the Prime Minister might instead be facing the equally grim prospect of a party on the verge of giving up. And remember, one of the main reasons for ousting Boris Johnson was that he was 6 points behind in the polls. To this point, we can pretty much guarantee that the 20 or so points the Tories are behind Labour at this point was probably not worth getting rid of Boris Johnson for. One Tory MP who campaigned in Tamworth, where the Conservatives lost to Labour by just 1,300 votes, said they were dismayed at the lack of top-level support, with one cabinet minister calling off a campaign trip the day they were meant to arrive. It's very frustrating and it's dispiriting for the staff, the MP said. If the ministers won't turn up, then the MPs don't. And then the activists lose their heart. It all starts from the top. Even the PM wasn't exactly visible. We could have won Tamworth, but our campaigning just wasn't up to strength. Of course, there were national factors, but on polling day it comes down to raw power on the doorstep, and Labour totally outgunned us. They were much more visible. There's no strategy for the Tories. They don't have a strategy. They don't know what they are even trying to fight for. You have these half-hearted attempts to fight net zero. You have these half-hearted attempts to get rid of boat people, and still they're putting them in the hotels and can't deport them. And even then, when it comes to when their party members need the most support, which is during a by-election and obviously during an election as well, there's no support there. There's nothing. The Tory party just don't care anymore. It's like they've realised that they're not going to win and so aren't even trying. And at that point, if they aren't even going to try and win in a by-election, why would their voters turn out and vote for them? Completely rudderless party. I genuinely cannot wait for them to get destroyed at the next election. Though, of course, I would rather they get destroyed by Reform UK or UKIP or something like that, instead of Labour, who are just going to take every problem and probably make it worse. Though fortunately not to Corbyn levels of worse. Insiders said that such vignettes added to the impression delivered by the recent Conservative conference of a party not so much gearing up for an election fight as preparing the ground for a succession battle once it's defeated. After the gathering in Manchester was marked by various ideological factions trying to push the party in different directions on areas such as tax cuts and culture wars, defeat in Tamworth and Mid-Bedfordshire, I keep saying Tamworth and Mid-Bedfordshire, has seemingly reinvigorated all sides. With Liz Truss due to set out her own alternative budget a week before Jeremy Hunt's autumn statement, pressure is likely to increase on the Chancellor to make major cuts on income and inheritance taxes. Some MPs, however, believe this would be a big mistake. We can't head back into the Poundland Thatcherism of Truss, said one. MPs are obviously jittery. There is no enthusiasm for Labour, but also an absence of any apparent strategy from the government. If we get it wrong, we risk turning a challenging situation into a disaster. Yes, moving away from Liz Truss's Thatcherism has absolutely done wonders for the party. You just won 2 by-elections, didn't you? Having said that, I am very, very aware that Liz Truss's version of Thatcherism is probably just shooting the Tories in the foot more than it's helping. I think if you are going to have someone push Liz Truss's agenda, it has to be someone who wasn't even in her cabinet. Though I don't think we are going to see anyone like that until after the next election. I think the Tories are in for a complete rejigging of how they work and what they are after, but it's going to take this absolute election obliteration to let them get their heads in order. Another backbencher argued that Sunak's strategy of focusing on cutting inflation rather than taxes was the right one. The parliamentary party needs to unite behind our excellent Prime Minister, they said. But another MP said Tory voters stayed at home during the by-election probably because they don't believe the government is delivering Conservative governance. They added, that needs to change rapidly, especially in the areas of taxation. All eyes are now on Jeremy Hunt's autumn statement. This is the problem with the Tory party at the moment. They have people all the way over to Labour in the 70s, having internal battles with the quote-unquote sensible centrists, and then, of course, people all the way to the right, such as Liz Truss, who basically don't want any taxes whatsoever. And when you have a broad church like that, and one faction is obviously winning above the rest, you're obviously going to get massive infighting, and you end up with a party that looks like it doesn't know what it's doing, because that's exactly what the Tory party is at the moment. Danny Kruger, the Devizes MP and co-chair of the right-leaning New Conservatives group, said Sunak needed to be more coherent, robust and braver on areas such as transgender rights and migration, as well as tax cuts. In other words, he needs to fight the culture war harder, which I have to agree with. I think fighting the culture war is actually a vote winner, because your average voter just wants a normal British life, and pushing all these transgender and migrant rights is the opposite of that. I really do believe that the PM wants to do the right thing in this. I think he is constrained by opinion in Whitehall, in the civil service, and to a degree on our benches as well, Kruger told the BBC. And I have to agree with that. The civil service obviously has this huge bubble around it that makes it effectively a massive Labour cohort, and will constantly infight with senior Tory MPs constantly, because they just completely disagree with them and only want to enact Labour's agenda, which is genuinely probably why you've seen a lot of Labour ideas be put forward by the Tories and actually get through, while actual Conservative ideas always seem to fall at the first hurdle. Some Tory figures are less openly supportive of Sunak, even obliquely. David Frost, the Brexit negotiator turned peer, called the by-election results extremely bad, adding that these results show that the national polls are broadly correct and that the strategy of denial is unlikely to work. Nevertheless, there appears to be almost no appetite to try to unseat Sunak and install what would be a 6th Conservative Prime Minister in the past 7 years. Miriam Cates, who co-chairs the New Conservatives with Kruger, told The Guardian it would be crazy to consider a leadership change, adding, but we need a King's Speech full of truly conservative legislation that will appeal to our voters who are currently minded to stay at home. Even those loyal to Truss and Boris Johnson accept that Sunak will lead the Conservatives into the election. No one is seriously thinking about removing Sunak. An ally of Truss said it would be preposterous. And so I hope you fully understand the Tories' problem at the moment. They can't win an election, they aren't going to win an election, they are struggling to get their supporters out to even vote for them, and it is a problem entirely of their own making. They panicked with Liz Truss's mini-budget, even though, as I've gone through many times on this channel, it wasn't entirely her fault. In fact, I'd say it was probably 10% her fault, as the Bank of England did not tell her about the economic problems that the Bank of England had caused, meaning that you can't actually get away from the current orthodoxy of the economists in the Bank of England without causing a massive issue. And instead of investigating how the hell we've got into that situation, everyone just wanted to blame Liz Truss. However, that's by the by. Since she was a very unpopular Prime Minister, and since they didn't try and support her and say, look, let's make some minor changes to this budget, but we'll carry on trying to follow this change in orthodoxy, they just kicked her out and put in who they wanted in the whole time anyway, which is, of course, Rishi Sunak. And now he's 20-odd points behind Labour. And now the Tories know that if they have another leadership contest, they are just going to be even more blown out at the next election. So they're making the best of an absolutely horrific situation and keeping Sunak in there to effectively zombie the government into the next election. in which they will inevitably lose. And at that point, during opposition, that is when they will try to reconfigure exactly what they are as a party. And it is my hope that they essentially become something like Liz Truss's party, but with Margaret Thatcher's charisma and intelligence, and not Liz Truss's "we're importing a load of cheese, isn't that a massive disgrace" energy. So that's the weekend black pill for you. I mean, I make it out like the Tories are going to be our saviour or something. You might take that away from this. No, the Tories are not our saviour. The Tories are just obviously a slightly better choice than Labour. But realistically, I think we have to bear the brunt of 4 years of Labour, who will probably end up trying to ban this channel along with many others in the UK, since dissenting voices are racist or something. And hopefully in a few years' time we will see a Tory party that actually tries to be conservative and actually make something of the country rather than manage its decline. And that would time it pretty well with the end of the clown decade, where things get better. So with that, I will leave you with that speck of hope. So once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.